I made this series of videos on the JavaScript DOM a few years ago, and everything still applies today. Together, this is a course on interacting with the DOM using JavaScript. The DOM stands for Document Object Model, and this course is all about how to use JavaScript to interact with elements on a website. So let's start learning. JavaScript allows you to select elements from the DOM of a website and then make changes to those elements. First, I'm going to go over ways to select these elements using JavaScript. Up here I have the HTML, and you can see down here is where the HTML is being rendered. And the JavaScript I'm going to put up here. So here we have document.getElementById. So we're going to find an ID in the document over here, and it's going to be div1. So that's going to select this entire element right here because the ID is div1. And you can pass any ID. If I passed in div2, it would select this section right here. Now I have getElementsByClassName, and I've passed in a class name, unicycle. Something to look at here is this word elements. It's a plural. That means you're going to get all elements that have that class name. As we have it, it's going to select this element and this element. Both of them have the class of unicycle. And a lot of these can be called on any element, not just the document. So instead of putting document here, if I put div1, it's only going to select the elements that have class unicycle in div1. So here's div1, and we would only select this item that has the class unicycle. We would not select this one because that's not in div1. But for now, I'm going to change this back to document. And now we have getElementsByTagName. It's kind of like the previous one, except instead of passing a class name, you're going to pass a tag name. So that would just be this, P. So this would get all the paragraphs in the document. So here, here, here. But again, if I put something like div1 here, we would only get the paragraphs in div1. Now this is showing query selector. For query selector, you can pass in a string containing one or more CSS selectors separated by commas. And this is going to return the first element within the document that matches that selection. Now this can be used to find the same things you found in the above methods. For instance, when we pass in this as the query selector, that's going to be the same thing as just finding the first item with the class name unicycle. Or we can put it in like this, and that's going to be the same thing as finding the first element with an ID of, let's change this to div2. Now you can also do query selector all, kind of like query selector, but now we're returning an array of elements. You can pass in different items to match. So this is going to match the class unicycle, and this is going to match the ID div2. So you can get every item that has the class unicycle or the ID div2. Now once you've selected the elements, there are different things you can do with them. In this video I'll just show you how to set new text or HTML. So first I have a text variable that just has an h1 tag with the words hello world inside. And now I'm going to set div1, which you can see up here, which is document.getElementById div1. I'm going to set the inner HTML to text. That means I'm going to replace all the HTML inside div1 with this new HTML. So look, div1 is right here. So this whole thing is div1. The whole thing's going to be replaced with just this new HTML. So let's run that and see what happens. As you can see, it replaced everything in this blue line here with hello world. And now let's try it on query unicycle. And let's change this, since it's query unicycle, this should be unicycle. And run that. And the first class with unicycle has changed to hello world. Now a lot of these are actually giving you an array of elements, remember? So to change things in an array of elements, you're going to have to use a loop. So let me comment out that, and we see this loop. We're going to go through the whole query all.length. So for every element that we've queried in query all, we're going to set the inner HTML to the text. So let's run that. And you can see here we have 3 hello worlds because this is getting every unicycle and then the div2. So we have this became hello world, that's class unicycle, this became hello world, and then this whole thing section right here became hello world. Now there is a security risk whenever you use inner HTML, especially when you're setting strings over which you have no control. This could open you up to a cross-site scripting attack. For that reason, it is recommended that you not use inner HTML when inserting plain text. Instead, you can use text content like this. And let me just comment this out. And text content is not going to interpret the past content as HTML, but just inserts it as raw text. So if I run that, it's going to have the h1 tags right in there. It's just going to put the raw text instead of trying to create the actual heading in the page. And you can do that for any of these examples we've seen already. After selecting a DOM element, you can set and get the CSS styles of that element. So here's the HTML here, and the HTML is being rendered down here. And you can see that we have an ID of line for this paragraph tag, and we have an ID of attribute here for this paragraph tag. Here we have an inline style, making this bold. And if you look up this at the CSS, we've also added this CSS here. So we've created the body and made the font size 30 pixels. And I'm just going to close this CSS here. You can see for the JavaScript, we've already selected two things. So in the line variable, we've got element by ID line. That's this first one, the first paragraph tag. Then we get element by ID attribute. That's the second paragraph tag here. So I want to change the CSS style of the line. So look, we have line.style.color. So line refers to this variable right here, the get element by ID line. Then you put style because we're changing the style, and then we want to change the color style, and we're going to set that to red. So if I run that, you'll see now we have red text. You can also change this to background, and we're going to make the background red. There are a lot of different words you can put here to change the different CSS style elements. If you check the link in the description, you can see a list of all the CSS style elements that you can change. Now here's another example. We're going to set the attribute, that's get element by ID attribute here, the style, and the box shadow. We're going to set this to this box shadow. And now we have a box shadow down here. So here we're just setting one style property at a time, but there are two ways that you can set a lot of style properties at once. And we're using line.style.css text, and then you can see I've put in multiple styles. Color blue, and then you separate with a semicolon, border, and adding a border here. Or you can set the attribute of style. You set attribute. Now notice we don't have the word style anymore. It's just attribute dot set attribute. And remember, attribute is just a name from up here, but you always have to use this set attribute and set the attribute of style, and then you can put multiple styles that you want to set here. One thing about this though that you need to know is that once we've run this, you can see that we have the styles here. This line is no longer bold. We have an inline style up here to make this line bold. But when you set all the styles at once with either CSS text or set attribute, it's going to remove any inline styles and just replace all of the inline styles with whatever you are setting here. Sometimes it can be better just to set one style at a time if you don't want to get rid of the other styles that already exist. Now let me show you two ways you can figure out what styles are already on an element. Okay, I've opened up a log here, and I'm going to put, okay, console.log line.style. So up here, we were setting line.style.background to equal red, and now we're just going to console.log line.style. Now if I put line.style.background, it will just show what the background color is. But if I do line.style and don't put .background, it's going to show every style element. So let me run that and I can show you that. And if I expand this, this is another way of seeing every style element that you can set with JavaScript. And this is going to show a list of every style element. And you can see we have border left here. This is set. Border color is black. A lot of things though are not set. You can see a lot of these just have an empty string. We don't have anything set for most of these, but we do have the color as blue. One thing that you'll notice here, if I go back to the CSS over in the code, and we see we have font size 30 pixels. Well, let's look at the font size in here. Font size is showing as an empty string here. That is because when you are logging the style or working with this style here, it's only going to show the inline styles. And remember, this up here is adding an inline style. This will not show any other styles that just happen to be on the element. For instance, it's not going to show this style because it's not an inline style. It just happens to also apply to that element. Now, there is a way to get all the styles, even styles that are not in line on the element, and that's with getComputedStyle. So let me show you that. Now, this is a little different. I'm not calling it on the line variable that I set up here. I'm actually calling it on the window object, window.getComputedStyle, and then I have to pass in the DOM element. I have to pass in this line variable that we created up here to get the computed style on the line. And now it's going to show everything, even computed styles. So as an example, if we go down to, font size. Font size is 30 pixels. And now none of these are showing empty strings because everything is something. We even have a height of 36 pixels. Now we never set the height of 36 pixels. That's just the actual height. So everything, like before, when we console.log just style, a lot of them would be empty strings because they were never specifically set. But when we use getComputedStyle, it's going to show what the style is even if you never set it. When an event occurs in the HTML DOM, JavaScript code can be executed. An example of an event is when a user clicks on an HTML element. To execute code when a user clicks on an element, just add JavaScript code to the onClick HTML attribute. If you look at the HTML section, we have the onClick attribute, and there's a JavaScript command right in here. This.innerHTML equals serial. So I don't have anything in the JavaScript section over here, but still, when I click on what is my favorite food, it becomes cereal. You'll notice I also have some CSS here. This is kind of just for fun. I just thought it was kind of cool that you can use the word papaya whip and your browser knows that's a color. That's just a built-in color, papaya whip. Now, besides running a command right here, we can also call a function from our other JavaScript code. So if we have the onClick event, we can call change color and then pass in this. That means we're passing in this h1 tag. We're passing in this whole thing here to the change color function. So over in the JavaScript section, we're going to put this change color function. It's going to take an object, and then we're going to do object.style.color equals Peru. Because Peru is not just a country, it's a color also. At least according to your browser. So I've reset this. If I click here, it's now changed to the color Peru. Now on these two, we set the onClick event right in the HTML. However, you can also set the onClick event in the JavaScript. So here's a button here, and there's nothing in this button that shows what happens when you click the button. But over in the JavaScript, I'm going to put in some code here. First, we're going to get the element, document.getElementById, my button. That's this button over here. And then we're going to set an onClick event right in the JavaScript, and the event is set to change background color to medium orchid. Now this is just a function call that we now have to create. Okay, here's the function. Function, change background color to medium orchid, and we're going to do document.querySelectorBody. So that's going to apply to the whole body of the HTML. And we're going to set the style background to medium orchid. Medium orchid is another color in your browser. So if I click the button here, it's medium orchid for the background. So that's how you can change the background of your whole page. Besides onClick, you can also use onLoad or onUnload. So that would be something like this. You would normally put it on your body tag, which would be at the beginning. In CodePen, you don't use a body tag. But if you put an onLoad event on your body and you run a function here, these events are often triggered when the user enters or leaves the page, and they often are used to deal with cookies when you're just using the onLoad and onUnload. But we're not going to use this right now. So another thing I wanted to show you is onInput. Let's bring this down a little bit. OnInput means whenever you input any characters or anything, it's going to call a function here. So here we have the text box down here, and now every time I put in any letter, it's calling a function. I haven't created the function yet, so now it's not doing anything. So let's create that function. So the function is remove letter from h1. So we're going to set h1 variable to document.querySelector h1. That's just going to select the first h1 tag on the HTML page, which is this one up here. Now we're going to find the h1.text content. That's the text inside the h1 right here. What is my favorite food? And we're going to set that equal to h1.text content. So we're setting equal to itself, but then we're slicing it, passing in 0, -1. That means we're just taking off the last letter of that field. Now this whole function is kind of just for fun, just to see what you can do. So let's see how it works. As you can see, every time I type a letter, another letter from the h1 tag gets removed. Also interestingly, anytime I delete a letter, something is removed too, because I'm putting an input of delete and it's still removing letters. Oh, the whole text is gone. And let me show you some other events you can do. So here I have a div, and there's an onMouseOver event that calls this function here, and it passes in the div. And we have an onMouseOut event that calls the mout function and passes in the div again. And we have a class of box. So let me put some CSS in here to make it look how we want it to look. So .box just means we're setting the class box to have these things. For background, we're using the color Rebecca purple. So for some reason, Rebecca gets her own purple. And then the color of the text is light goldenrod yellow, one of the longest text names. And then we're just going to set the height and the width, the font size, and some other things. So let's see what that looks like. And there's the box. And right now, if we mouse over and mouse out, nothing happens. So let's create these JavaScript functions, the mover and mout. Okay, here's mover, and we're receiving this object that gets passed into it, and we're setting the obj.innerHTML to get off me. And then for mout, which means mouse out, we're setting the innerHTML to thank you, smiley face, because you can put emoji in JavaScript code. So let's see what happens. I'm going to bring my mouse over. Oh, get off me! Thank you. Get off me. Thank you. There are a lot of other events that you can use to trigger JavaScript code. Check the link in the description to see a list of more events. The addEventListener method attaches an event handler to the specified element without overriding existing event handlers, so you can add many event handlers to one element. So here's the syntax. You're going to put the element you're trying to access, and then addEventListener, and then you're going to pass in the event, and this is the type of event, like click or mouse down, and then you're going to pass in the function, and then the use capture. This is a Boolean value specifying whether to use event bubbling or event capturing. This is optional, and I'll explain this in a little bit. So we already have this HTML code displaying over here, and we've already selected all of our elements. So what I'm going to do is create an event listener. So here we're attaching an event listener to the paragraph. That's this first paragraph up here. And it's going to be a click. So on click, we're going to run this function. So we're just going to set the background of my div to light blue, which it already is right now. But if we reset everything, it will go back to this coral. So now if I click the words, it changes to light blue. Now this actually does the same thing that that onClick would do. So when you use addEventListener and pass in click for the event, you could also do it like this. you could set onClick equal to this function here. However, there are some bad things about using onClick. With onClick, you may have only one event assigned at a time. So if you assign another event to onClick, it will overwrite the first event. You also can't set the use capture, so generally you want to use addEventListener. However, onClick does work in all browsers, and addEventListener does not work in older versions of Internet Explorer before version 9. Before version 9, you have to use attachEvent instead of addEventListener. Okay, instead of declaring our entire function in here, we can actually just pass a function reference, change text, and then it will call that function. Then here it's just going to set the text content of paragraph 2 to some other words. So if I click here, you can see that two things just happened. The color changed to light blue, and this text down here changed. With onClick, only this text would change because it would have overwritten the changing the background color. But with addEventListener, both things can happen. Okay, this right here is an example of something besides click. Before we were using the click event, now we're using the mouse over event. So if I bring the mouse over the first div, and we see it changes to dark khaki for div 2. Now I'm going to talk about the use capture parameter. This changes the order that things happen in. So we have an event on the first paragraph, and then we have an event on the first div. So the myp and mydiv. So when I'm clicking the paragraph, I'm also clicking the div at the same time. So the last parameter is how it is determined which event to run first. So let's add the last parameter here. Remember, you don't need it because it defaults to false. So the first event listener is going to run the change text function. The second event listener is going to run the change text to function. So we have to create that function. So here's change text 2. Change text and change text 2 are both going to change the second paragraph text content. And this one is going to just take the text contents and add the real answer onto the end. And we're going to make a slight modification to change text 1. Now both change text and change text 2 are going to take the text content that's already there and then append new text. And this will help us see what order the functions are executed in. If I click the paragraph 1 and the div at the same time, you can see first it's appending the real answer, and then it's appending, according to a Cornell publication, the answer is 700 pounds. So if this last parameter is set to true, the outermost element's event is handled first, and then the inner. However, if this is set to false, the innermost element's event is handled first, and then the outer. So let's see an example of that. And now here we can see first it appends, according to Cornell publication, the answer is 700 pounds, and then it appends the real answer. So again, when two event listeners are attached to two different elements, but they're going to run at the same time, the last parameter tells what order to run them in. Okay, the last thing I want to talk about is remove event listener. With remove event listener, it's pretty self-explanatory. It just removes an event listener that you previously added. You just have to make sure that the parameters that you pass in are exactly the same, so it removes the exact one. You can only remove an event listener where you are calling a function by a name here. If you actually put in the function like this into the event listener, then removing it won't work. Everything in HTML is a node. That includes the document, all HTML elements, the text in the elements, HTML attributes, and comments. These form a node tree. All nodes in the tree can be accessed by JavaScript. Nodes can be created, modified, or deleted. In a node tree, the top node is called the root node. So inside the document we have the root element, which is HTML, and then every node has exactly one parent except the root. This element head node and the element body node each have the HTML node as their root node, and the head and the body are children of the HTML node. A node can have any number of children. Also, siblings are nodes with the same parent. So the head element is a sibling of the body element. And this A element is a sibling of the H1 element. And both these elements have the body element as their parent element. So here, we're creating an element, document.createElement, and we're making it a paragraph tag element. Then we have to add the text to the paragraph. So we're going to create a text nodes. So we have create text node here, and it's going to add this text into that node, and then we're going to append them together. So we have the paragraph element that we created, and then we have append child, and then the node. This is the text that we created. So the text node we created is a child of the paragraph node. Now we just have to add the node we created to the document. We're going to set parent to equal document.getElementById div1. That's this div1 up here in the HTML. And we're going to do parent.appendChild para. So we're going to add a new child node to this parent. So to this div1, where we're adding a new child node, which is the node that we created up here. So let me run that, and we'll see it up in the HTML. See, now we just added up above the world so high at the end here. We appended the child. Okay, let's try something new. Here, I'm going to create another paragraph, para2, document.createElementP. That's the same thing we had in this line up here, but we're going to add the text differently. So one way to create the text is the create text node, but you can also set the inner HTML to be the new text. So this is also creating a new text node within the paragraph. Just this line is taking the place of these two lines, and it does basically the same thing. So now we're going to get another element on the page. The child node is document.getElementById P1. We now have this node up here from the HTML, and we're going to insert before. Before we did append child, which always puts the new node at the end. But you can also put in new nodes before other nodes. So instead of parent.appendChild, we have parent.insertBefore. And the first thing we're going to pass in is what we're going to insert, and then which is para2. That's this up here that we created. And the second thing we're going to pass through is what we want it to be inserted before. So we have the P1 up here, which is the twinkle twinkle little star, and we want to insert like a diamond in the sky before twinkle twinkle little star. So let's run that and see what happens. Yep, just like what I said. It inserts it before twinkle twinkle little star. I'm going to show you two more things in this video: replacing a child and removing a child. So these first two lines, we're just creating another paragraph element. We have para3, and it's going to be a paragraph element, and we're going to put in the text when the blazing sun is gone. And now we're going to get the parent node, that's the div1, replace child. And the first thing we're going to pass in is what the new element is that we're going to be putting in. The second thing we're going to be passing in is what we want to be replaced. So remember, child is this P1 up here. That's the twinkle twinkle little star. But now we want to replace it with this new line, this new paragraph. So let's try that. And it's replaced. It doesn't say twinkle twinkle little star anymore. It says when the blazing sun is gone. And then the last thing I want to show you is removing a child. So we have parent, that's the div again, dot remove child, and we just pass in what we want to remove. We want to remove para3, which is what we just added. So if we run that, it does not say when the blazing sun is gone anymore. We've removed that child. You can animate elements in the DOM with CSS or JavaScript. This video is going to show how to animate DOM elements using JavaScript without any frameworks. First, I will show you how to create an animation by programming gradual changes in an element style. Then I will talk about the new element.animate method. To make animation possible, the animated element must be animated relative to a parent container. The parent must use relative positioning, while the animated element must use absolute positioning. So if you see up here, we have the container, my container, and then we have the child element, the my animation. That's what the code is going to animate. And if you see here, we have the container that has the relative positioning, and we have the my animation that has the absolute positioning. We can use a timer to call gradual changes in an element style, and when the timer's interval is small, the animation looks continuous. So let's look at the code. So you can see when this button is clicked, it calls the myMove function, which is right down here. So we're going to get the element by ID, get my animation and assign it to element, and then we're going to set the position to 0. And then we're going to start this set interval, and we're going to pass in the frame function that we're going to run, and we're going to run this function every 10 milliseconds. And we're going to assign this to ID. That's so we can stop the interval when we need to. So in the frame function, if position equals 350, that just means that the square is at the end of the box here. Let's put that at the beginning. So if the square is at the end of the box, we're going to clear interval, and we pass in the ID that's up here. That just means we're going to stop running this function. We're going to stop running the frame function every 10 milliseconds. Else, we're going to move it. So we're going to increment the position from 0 to 1, and then we're going to set the top and the left style to the position. First is going to be 1 pixel, 2 pixels, 3 pixels, 4 pixels, 5 pixels, just like that. And then it's just going to animate across the screen. And you can easily use different style elements. Instead of using top and left, you can use the color, you can use size. Any CSS element you can animate using this method. Now I'm going to show you a different way to animate using the element.animate method, which is part of the Web Animations API. And this method is actually the animation method with the best performance. So let me paste in the code here. Now this is currently only supported in newer versions of Chrome, Firefox, and Opera. However, there is a polyfill that you can use to add support for most other browsers. Check the description for a link to the polyfill, and then you'll be able to use this all the time. So this is going to animate the div item, so I need to add the div item to the HTML. Okay, so here's the div with the ID item, and in the CSS, I've already added some CSS. It's going to start with the background blue, position absolute, and then a height, width, and the margin is just going to make it so it centers right in the square. So, you can see the animation happening right now. Now let's go over the code that shows how this animation is created. So first we get the item, the get item by ID item, so that's that div, and then we're going to call item.animate. Into the animate function, we're going to pass two things. This first thing we pass in is the keyframes. So this is just an object formatted to represent a set of keyframes. And then the second thing we're going to pass in is right here, which is the options. So let's look at the keyframes. In the keyframes, it's just going to go from one keyframe to the next. So in this first keyframe, it's going to set the transform. We're going to set the scale to 1. That's just 100%. So we're not actually doing anything for that. And then we are going to set the background to red. That's how we started. And then the opacity to 1, which is 100%. So the first keyframe is basically just how we started. Now the second keyframe here, let's go on to the next line. Let's pop this over a little bit. The second keyframe, we're going to do a transform, have the scale go to 0.5, so 50% size. We're going to rotate it 270 degrees, set the background to blue, and the opacity to 0.5 or 50%. So it's going to animate between this keyframe and this keyframe. And now the offset is optional. If you don't have offsets, it will evenly distribute each keyframe within the duration. But if you have offsets, then it won't be equally distributed. So since I have 0.2 here, it's going to go from the first keyframe to the second keyframe in 20% of the time, and then it'll take 70% of the time to go to offset 1. The offsets in the keyframe have to be in numerical order. So you have 0, 0.2, and 1. It always ends with 1. If we change that to 0.5, you'll see the animation will be slightly different. So it's just the first part of it is going to take half the time instead of just the 20% of the time. So you can see the last keyframe we put the scale back to 1, we rotate it to 0 degrees, and set the background back to red, opacity back to red. So for the options, we have, you set the duration in milliseconds, so that's 2 seconds. The easing, we can change this to something like linear. And let's see what that's going to look like. So here it's not going to change speed as much between the different keyframes. And then the delay is just how long it waits before the animation runs after the page loads. And iterations, we're going to keep going on forever, but you can just make it go like 2 or 3 iterations. Direction, it's going to alternate. So that's why it keeps changing the direction that it's spinning. But if we put normal here and we run that, now you can see it'll just always keep going the same direction. And if you put reverse here, we'll always go the other direction. Now all these options are optional. And this fill here, this fill is going to dictate whether the animation's effects should be reflected by the element prior to playing, which would be backwards, or it should be retained after the animation is completed playing, which is forwards, or you could put both. And one thing to know about the keyframes up here is that you can animate pretty much any CSS property. So transform, background, opacity, these are all CSS properties, and you can put different ones there to animate different properties. In my last video on animation, I demonstrated how to create an animation using setInterval and element.animate. In this video, I will demonstrate another way called requestAnimationFrame. This way of animating is similar to setInterval, but is more optimized for animation. The benefits of requestAnimationFrame over setInterval are: the browser can optimize it so animations will be smoother, animations in inactive tabs will stop, allowing the CPU to chill, and it's more battery friendly. The element.animate method discussed in my last video is simpler and has better performance than requestAnimationFrame. However, it's not as widely supported yet. So let's see what this code is going to do. If you look on the side, you'll see what happens when I hit the toggle button. It starts this animation. And I see it just repeats, but if I hit the toggle button again, it stops the animation. And then I can press it again to start it again, or stop it again. So it's all happening because of this window.requestAnimationFrame. This method tells the browser that you wish to perform the animation and requests that the browser call a specific function to update an animation before the next repaint. So, in this example, it's calling the step method. And the number of callbacks is usually 60 times per second, but will generally match the display refresh rate in most web browsers. And you can see in the step method right here, the callback method is passed a timestamp, which is the time the callback begins to run. So let's actually go through the whole thing. You can see up here we have the button, toggle animation, and it's going to run this function down here, toggle animation. So this is either choosing to start the animation or stop the animation. So if the toggle's off, then we're going to set to true, and then we're going to run the animation, window.requestAnimationFrame, and then we're going to call the step function. So that's how the step function initially starts. However, if it's already running, we are going to we're going to set the toggle to equals false, and we're going to cancel animation frame. So if you call this method cancel animation frame and then put in a stop ID, it's just going to stop the animation. So this stop ID comes from up here. Whenever you call window.requestAnimationFrame, it's going to return an ID, and then if you call cancel animation frame on that ID, it stops the animation. So let's go back up to the step function. Like I said, it's going to take a timestamp, and then you can see some of these variables were initialized up here. If start has not been assigned yet, or the progress is more than 400, start is going to equal timestamp. So progress, this is how we're going to determine what pixel we want the square to be at on the screen. So we're just going to take the timestamp that was passed in minus start, and the timestamp will always be increasing. So when we do timestamp minus the start, which was the first timestamp, it's going to slowly be increasing as the timestamp increases. Now that's going to be milliseconds. So if we divide that by 10, it will equal the number of pixels we want. And we're going to add 50 just because we don't want the square to start at the very top of the page. We want it to be below the button. And then we're just going to set element.style.top to equal progress plus px. So the number of pixels that we've gotten from this progress variable. And then at the end of the step function, we call it again with the window.requestAnimationFrame and pass in step. So this is just going to keep calling over and over again, and every time it's called, it's going to pass in a new timestamp, and that's what's going to increase the number in the progress, which will increase the top style, and will slowly make it the square go down. So let's see that again. See, it's just going down, and then when we toggle it, it's going to call this cancel animation with the stop ID, and it's going to stop. The window object is supported by all browsers. It represents the browser's window. All global JavaScript objects, functions, and variables automatically become members of the window object. Even the document object from the DOM is part of the window object. So if you look here, document.getElementById, and we have demo here, this is actually part of the window object because the word window is implied. It's actually window.document.getElementById demo. Each tab in a browser contains its own window object. The window object contains many properties and methods. In this video, I will go over getting a window size and opening, closing, and moving a window. In other videos, I will talk more about other things you can do with the window object. So you can already see this code here, where you see the only HTML is just this p tag with the ID demo, and we're going to get that tag here, and then we're going to run the update function. And also, we have window.addEventListener on resize. We're going to run the update function. So in the update function, we're just going to set the inner HTML of this element here, this demo element. We're going to set it to be this text right here. And you see part of the text is window.innerWidth and window.innerHeight. So that's how you get the height and width of the window. And because we have this addEventListener with resize, anytime we resize the window, it's going to update those numbers. So if you look here, as I resize the window, those numbers are updating to the actual height and width of the window. Okay, now I will show you how to use the window object to open a new window. So here, we're going to create a variable called newWindowObj, and we're going to run the window.open command. So we're going to pass in 3 different arguments to this function. First argument is the web address that we're trying to open. And then it's going to be the name of the window that we can refer to later. And then it's going to be the options. So there are a lot of options you can set. And I'm going to try to run this so it will open the window. Okay, you can see it popped up this window right here. I'm going to move it just to the side here. Not all the options are available in every browser. So even though it says resizable false, scroll bars false, well, there is a scroll bar here. And look, I can resize this. But in some other browsers, these would work. But some of the things that do work are the width and height. 400 pixels and 300 pixels, and then the top and left, that's where the window originally showed up. So if I change the width to 500 and the height to 600, I can change the top to 100 and the left to 400, and we'll just see what happens here. Let me close that and run this again. Okay, so you can see it pops up in a different place this time. Okay, well, let's change those back for now, though. And now I'm just going to add something right to the HTML. Right in the HTML code, I'm going to add this button with the value of close window, and on click, it's going to call newWindowObj.close. So this newWindowObj is the name of this variable here, and that's how we'll know which window to run the close function on. So let's try that. If I hit run, it's going to open the window. Now let me just move the window over here so when I click the button, you'll still see the other window in the background. Click close window and it closes. Now you may be wondering, here we use this new window object that comes from down here. But what about the name over here, the new window name? Well, that's what you use if you're going to target a link. So let me put in a link here, and you can see we're going to go to this other website. That's my website, and I'm going to target new window, and that's where that name comes in down here. So let's try that. I popped open the window, move this to the side so you can see it. I'm going to click the link, and it updates the web page in that new window. The last thing I'm going to show you in this video is moving a window. So let me add another button here. So you can see on click is going to call the move function. So we have to create the move function down here. And when the move function runs, it's going to call new window obj.moveBy, and then we're going to put how many pixels we're going to move by. So it's going to move 50 pixels left and 0 pixels down. You can also do move to, and then it will go to an exact coordinate on the screen. This focus command here, that's just going to pop the window up to the top of the screen. So if the window is behind another window, focus will make it pop up to the top of the screen. When we first tried this though, it's not going to work. If I click run to pop up the window, and then I'm going to move this to the side, if I click move window, it's not going to move. That's because of a CORS error. If I open up the JavaScript error console, you'll see it just says block the frame with origin code pin, because I'm using code pin from accessing a cross origin frame. So this would work if I wasn't doing it through code pin, but there's a way to just demonstrate this and not have the error. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this window, and here where I'm opening a specific address, I'm just going to delete that. So now it's going to open a window, but it's not going to load a website into that window. So let's run that, and see it opens up just a blank window. And now when I click move window, see it moves over, and you can see that when I click this website that has the move window button, the window goes behind this window. But if I click move window, it moves and it jumps into focus here, so it pops back up. So if I move it here, then you can maybe see it move better. So it just keeps moving, and then we can still load the website, and we can still close the window. JavaScript has 3 kinds of pop-up boxes: alert box, confirm box, and prompt box. Many people think you should almost never use this feature of JavaScript, preferring custom modals instead. The reason for this is because they're very obtrusive. They lock the entire browser and will take focus even if initiated by an inactive tab. But there are still occasionally good reasons to use them, so they're good to know about. So for instance, right now we have the alert here. So if I run this, it's going to pop up, I am an alert box right here. Now you cannot choose where the pop-up box is going to be. That's up to the browser. That's another reason why custom modals are often better, because you have more choice of where it's going to appear in the browser. So these alert boxes are just to give a message, and then you hit OK to make the message go away. One example is if you want to give a message that a person is just about to be automatically logged out of a website. Okay, let's comment this out, and we're going to put another one here. Now I'm going to show you the confirm box. So this is the code for the confirm box. You're going to put the word confirm, and then you're going to put what you want to be confirmed, and this is going to return a boolean. So if we run this to see what it looks like, so we can now either push cancel or OK. If we put OK, it will return true. If we put cancel, it will return false. So if I click OK, you'll see in the console you pressed OK. That comes from this right here. Or if I run this again and press cancel, in the console say you pressed cancel. And just, alert and confirm, these are all part of the window object. So you could write it like this: window.confirm or window.alert. That's implied. If I run this, it will do the exact same thing, but the window is just implied when you use alert or confirm. Okay, and the last one is the prompt. Let me comment this out. For prompt, you can pass in 2 things. The first is the message that's going to show, and the second thing is the default text in the text box. Let me run this so you can see what I mean. So in prompt, you can actually put in a piece of information here, and then it will return that piece of information. So you can see in this code, it's person is going to equal, and it's going to set the variable person to equal whatever we put in here. So if we can change this name, and then if I hit OK, you can see in the console.log, hello Quincy, how are you today? And we just get it from here. This if person equals null or person equals nothing, then we're going to put user canceled the prompt. Else, we're going to say hello, and we're going to bring in the person's name that we used, and then how are you today? So if I run that again and hit cancel, it's going to say user canceled the prompt. Okay, that's pop-up boxes. What's the difference between cookies, local storage, and session storage? Well, they are all ways to store data in the browser itself for use later. I'm going to talk about their differences and then show how to use them in JavaScript. So if you look at this chart here, you can see they all have different capacities. Cookies can only store 4 kilobytes of data, which is much smaller than local storage and session storage with 10 megabytes and 5 megabytes. And cookies are compatible with much older browsers. Cookies are compatible with browsers that use HTML4 and 5, and local storage and session storage are only compatible with newer browsers that use HTML5. Cookies are accessible from any window, same with local storage. Session storage is only accessible from the same tab that it was created in. And then the expiration date is different. Cookies, you have to manually set the expiration date. Local storage never expires until you use JavaScript to clear it, or if the user clears it. And session storage expires on tab close, because it's just for the session that the user is on. Now, just so you know, local storage and session storage are actually pretty similar, just that local storage lasts forever, and then session storage expires on tab close. And cookies are the one that's a little different. But these last two are the things that are really the most different between cookies and local storage and session storage. Cookies are stored on the browser and server, while local storage and session storage are only stored in the browser. And the interesting thing about cookies is that they are sent to the server on every request. Whenever you load an image, whenever you load a CSS file or a new HTML file, the cookie information is sent to the server. However, local storage and session storage, it's never sent to the server. So basically, cookies are best for data and anything that has to be accessed by the server and the local machine, or anything you want to set an expiration date on. Local storage is best for basically everything else. Cookies are often used for things such as authentication information that you have to regularly be sending back and forth, but for most use cases, you're going to want to use local storage or session storage, as long as you're pretty sure all your users will have browsers that use HTML5. But let's see how to use all of them in JavaScript. So if we see the code over here, it just says local storage.setItem, and then these are all key value pairs. So the key is breakfast, the value is cereal. So we can also get the item. So we're going to do, okay, we're gonna console.log that. And let's open up the browser's log. Okay, look at the bottom here, and we see cereal. We just set this local storage item, and then we console.log, and we got the item, breakfast is cereal. But I also open up this here so you can see where in Chrome you can actually see all the local storage items, and you can see all the cookies right in here. You can see the key and the value right here. Key is breakfast, value is cereal. Here are the different websites that have local storage that we're on. So you can see you can go back and forth between these two. We're on s.codepin.io, but if you're on a different website, it will show that website there. And for session storage, it's basically you do it just like local storage. Instead of localStorage.setItem, you type sessionStorage.setItem. So for instance, we could actually change this session storage, and we can change this to session storage. And then if I run that, I can go down to session storage over here, and you'll see the breakfast cereal there too. But let's say for session storage, we're going to have eggs. And you can see it changed the value up here. So we still have the local storage as cereal, and the session storage as eggs. Another thing you can do, if I change this to dinner, so we're going to have eggs for dinner and run that. Oh, and then I go back to the session storage over here. You can see that in the program, we only set the item dinner for eggs, but now we have breakfast eggs and dinner eggs because it didn't clear the session storage, even though it's not showing in our program anymore. Now we're going to change this back to local. Go here, and actually, I want to have for lunch. I also want to have cereal. And if we run that, you'll see breakfast cereal and lunch cereal. But if you ever change the value, it's not going to add a new one. It only adds a new one if you change the key. Okay, now here's how you would remove an item. Okay, so if I run this, you'll see lunch is now gone from the local storage here. And then if you ever just want to remove all the items, you just do localStorage.clear. I run that, and now everything is gone. We've cleared all the items. So let's go over cookies really quick. So here you're going to say document.cookie. Okay, and with cookies you also pass in a key value pair. So I went to the cookies section on the application DevTools, and just so you know, if you can't figure out what section the cookies and the session and the local storage are in, you're going to go to the application tab here. So the application tab is what's going to show all this. So if I run this, and then if I just refresh this down here, you'll see we have a cookie now. We have this one that's just created automatically, but we have this cookie. Let's move this over so I can see this a little better. The name is hello, the value is true. You can see the domain that it's on, and then the path, and then cookies have expiration dates. So this is, if you don't set an expiration date, I didn't set an expiration date here, it's going to just be expire when the session is over. Okay, here I just created another cookie, but I am going to have an expiration date. So the cookie do something only once equals true, and then expires equals, and then you have to put a date here. So if I run that, and then refresh the cookies down here, you'll see do something only once equals true, and now you'll see that there is an expiration date now. So you can set that to anything of when you want the cookie to expire, which will make it just automatically delete. Okay, now here's another cookie here, and here we're going to have the expiration date, and then I'm going to have one more parameter, which is the path. So here the path was just being set automatically, but now we can put what path we want it at, and now it's just going to be the root path. And the path is just which path on your website the cookie is associated with. So if you just want it associated with certain folders on your website, you can do that. And another thing I want to show you is if you want to get a cookie, you can do console.log document.cookie. So I'm just going to console.log document.cookie. And if we run that, if you look down here at the console, hello equals true, do something once equals true, person equals true, you cannot get one cookie at a time. All the cookies basically get stored in one string file. So when you get the cookies, you get them all at once, and then you would have to have extra code to parse out exactly what cookie you want to use if there's only one that you want to use for that use case. Okay, and the last thing I want to show you is how to delete a cookie. So to delete a cookie, you just set the cookie to have an expired expiration date. So right here, I pass in person equals, and it's not going to be, before it's person equals bow, and now we're just doing person equals because we don't want it to equal anything. And then we put an expiration date that's already expired, and then you have to make sure to use the exact same path. So we see it right here, person equals bow, but if we run that, and then if I refresh this, you can see now it's completely gone, it's been deleted. The history object contains the URLs visited by the user within a browser window. The history object is part of the window object and is accessed through the window.history property. if you see here, we have an alert with history.length. The window is just implied. This could easily be window.history.length. So if I run that, and it's going to say 3. That means there's 3 items in my history. If I just put back here, we can see there's 2 here plus the current one that I'm on. And we can also do history.back, and this is just a method. It's just like clicking the back key on your browser. Okay, I'm going to save this, and then I'm going to run that. It's going to show me the number of pages, and then it goes back to the previous page. Now, this can be tricky here, so I can hit forward here to go back to the previous page, but since I'm on CodePen, it automatically runs this again, so I can't really change this, and when I hit OK, it's going to go back again. So now we're kind of in an infinite loop or stuck, so we can't actually get back to that page to load it because it's automatically running this history.back. Well, there is kind of a workaround here. So after this question mark, I can just type in turn off JS equals true. Now I'm going to copy this whole thing, and because when I press enter here, it's still going to go back because it was already just about to do that. Now I'm going to paste in the website with the turn off JS equals true, and now it's not going to run the JavaScript automatically. So I can make this into a comment. I can save this. I can run that, and now it's not going to. Oh, I have to actually remove turn off JS equals true because I can't run it while that's on. And so I'm going to go to this, press enter to go to the website again. And now it's going to show 4, but it's not going to go back because I have that commented out. So another thing, instead of having back here, you could put forward. And another thing you can do is this, history.go. And if I put a number in here like 3, any number here, it will go back that many times into the history. So now it's going to go back 3 pages into the history. Or if you have a positive number, it's going to go forward pages into the history. Or if you have it as 0, it's just going to refresh the current page. But I'm not going to demonstrate that because then we'll have the same problem with JavaScript automatically running. But another thing I want to show you is replace state. Okay, replace state takes 3 parameters. First, I'll talk about the last one. The last parameter is going to change the actual domain name up here. So it's going to, instead of saying lyjlgd, it's going to say unicycle.html. The second parameter is not actually used by the browser. It's for possibly in the future, maybe JavaScript will use this, but it just sets a name to the page. And then this is a state object that you can pass in that you can then access this state later. This can be any JSON object basically. I'm just using a string, but it can be a JSON object. And this is going to basically replace this entry in the history. So right now in the history it's going to have this website up here in the address bar. Replace state is going to replace this history entry with this new history entry. So the previous history entry won't even be there. It won't even show this website. It's going to show this website in the history. Now, there's a weird thing with CodePen where this doesn't actually work correctly. But if I copy this, I'm going to open up the JavaScript developer console by doing Option Command J. It's different on Windows. And then I'm just going to run this command here. And if I press enter, you'll see right up here, it changed it. It's now unicycle.html. And if I run this, you can see it's 4, which it was at 4 before. So we haven't changed the number of pages in the history. And now, if we do console.log history.state, and I'm going to run that, it's going to pop up 4, and then the console says Bo is great. That comes from this state here. So you can access this first parameter that you pass in by just going to history.state. Now that's just a way to save some information between pages, and when you go to different pages you can access the same information. Now another thing to point out is that this website up here doesn't actually exist. There is no codepin.io/bocarn/pin/unicycle.html. So it didn't actually load that page. When you call replace state, it does not actually load the page. It just changes it in your address bar up here. You can put a full URL here as long as it has the same root URL that you were already on. I'm just going to copy this and bring it into my console. And we have an error, so let's see what happened. Oh, I should not have had the S. For some reason I'm not on the secure version of CodePen. So it has to be the exact same beginning of the URL to work. So let's try that again. So now you can look up here, codepin.io/bo is awesome. So we can replace everything after the main domain name. But if you put something wrong in the main domain name, you get this error that we had up here. And if I run this again, you will see it's still going to have the number 4 here. And when we ran that, it is going to give me an error here because of a weird thing with CodePen. But I want to show you one more thing. History.pushState. Now the first 2 parameters are optional. PushState and replaceState are almost exactly the same. So the first parameter is the state, the second parameter is the name that's not used, and the third parameter is what the domain name is going to be. So we'll put this into FreeCodeCamp. So I'm going to copy this, and I'm going to bring over to the JavaScript console. That's just because of CodePen here. And if I run that, now you'll see it's codepin.io/freecodecamp. And if I run this, it says 5 up here. Remember, before it kept saying 4, now it's saying 5. In replace state, we replace the current history entry with a new history entry. Push state just adds a history entry. So it's still going to have the page you were on in the history, and now it's going to have a new page in the history. So if I press the back button, you'll see there's just an extra item here. Before we just had this first CodePen history, now we have the second CodePen history right there. Well, that's the history object. Thanks for watching. My name is Bo Carnes. Don't forget to subscribe, and remember, use your code for good.